The steel hull creaked under pressure as Kapitän-Leutnant Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock stood in the confined control room of U-96, his eyes fixed on the depth gauge. The needle trembled at 200 meters, dangerously close to crushed depth. Above, the British destroyer HMS Wolverine circled like a predator, its Aztec sonar system sending piercing pings through the cold Atlantic waters. Each metallic echo reverberated through the submarine's hull, a haunting reminder that the hunters of the deep had become the hunted. The year was 1943, and the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic had irreversibly turned against the Kriegsmarine's U-boat fleet. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It's incredible to see our historical community spread across the world. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each subscription helps us continue unearthing these fascinating stories that shaped our world. Now, let's get to the story. For nearly 4 years, German submarines had terrorized Allied shipping in the Atlantic, threatening to sever Britain's vital maritime lifeline. But technological advancement would rewrite the rules of underwater warfare. The development and refinement of Allied sonar, a technology that turned sound into a weapon, would transform the ocean from the U-boat's sanctuary into their prison. This is the story of how science, strategy, and sheer determination combined to overcome the most formidable submarine force the world had yet seen. The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest continuous military campaign of World War II, running from the first day of hostilities in September 1939 until Germany's surrender in May 1945. More than a tactical engagement, it was an existential struggle for Britain, whose population and war machine relied on transatlantic shipments of food, raw materials, and military supplies. For Germany, the campaign represented an opportunity to strangle Britain into submission without a direct invasion. The North Atlantic's vast, storm-swept expanse became the arena for this deadly contest. Its waters witnessed the evolution of warfare technologies that would permanently alter naval combat. Chief among these was ASDIC, Allied Submarine Detection Investigation Committee, Sonar, a system that could detect submerged submarines by bouncing sound waves off their hulls. The technology itself wasn't new, having been developed in rudimentary form during World War I, but its integration with other anti-submarine warfare systems would prove revolutionary. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the Kriegsmarine's U-boat fleet, had initially dismissed Allied detection technologies. A submarine veteran of World War I, Dönitz believed in the fundamental superiority of the submersible vessel over surface ships. His tactical doctrine, the Wolfpack, or Rudeltaktik, involved coordinated groups of submarines attacking merchant convoys at night on the surface, where they could move faster and were harder to detect by early sonar systems that couldn't look upward effectively. In the war's opening phases, this approach proved devastatingly effective. During what U-boat crews called the Happy Time of 1940-1941, German submarines sank over 1,000 Allied ships while losing just 22 of their own. The Wolves seemed unstoppable. Admiral Sir Percy Noble, commander of Western Approaches Command, responsible for protecting Atlantic convoys, described the situation grimly. "The only thing that ever frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." Winston Churchill later wrote, "The only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." The battle's landscape was both physical and psychological. For Allied sailors, the Atlantic became an endless horizon where death could strike without warning from below. For U-boat crews, it was a hunting ground that gradually transformed into a lethal trap. And for the civilians whose lives depended on the ships carrying supplies, it represented an invisible front line that directly affected their survival. The tools of this battle evolved rapidly. The U-boats themselves were technological marvels of their time. The standard Type 7 submarine was 67 meters long, displaced 769 tons when surfaced, and could dive to 230 meters in an emergency. Armed with 14 torpedoes and a deck gun, they could stay at sea for months. Their diesel engines drove them across the ocean surface, while electric batteries powered them when submerged. This dual propulsion system was both an advantage and a critical weakness. Submarines needed to surface regularly to recharge batteries and refresh the air supply. The men who served aboard these vessels came to represent a unique warrior ethos in the German military. Elite volunteers, U-boat crewmen, endured conditions almost unimaginable to modern sailors. Confined spaces, foul air, constant dampness, extreme temperatures, and monotonous food were their constant companions. Privacy was non-existent, personal space limited to a bunk shared in rotation with other crew members. Captain Lieutenant Otto Kretschmer, one of the most successful U-boat commanders of the war, once described life aboard. "We lived like sardines, smelled like seals, and were as dirty as pigs." Yet morale remained remarkably high in the early war years, buoyed by operational success and the intense camaraderie that develops among men facing constant danger together. The average age of a U-boat crewman was just 22, with many officers in their mid-20s. They represented a cross-section of German society, though with a higher proportion of technical education than most military branches. Their training was rigorous and selective, with dropout rates exceeding 60% in some courses. Those who completed it joined a force that enjoyed special status within Nazi Germany until the tide turned against them. The strategic situation in early 1941 seemed to favor German prospects. U-boats were sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced. British shipyards, already working at capacity, couldn't close the gap. American production had not yet reached its full potential. The statistics told a grim story. During 1940, U-boats sank 471 ships, totaling 2.4 million tons, while losing only 22 of their own. In the first half of 1941, they sank a further 432 ships for 1.9 million tons at a cost of 12 U-boats. Most troubling for the Allies, the submarines were adapting quickly to convoy tactics. Through effective signals intelligence and patrol line techniques, they could locate convoys and summon wolf packs for coordinated night attacks. A typical engagement would see U-boats stalking a convoy throughout daylight hours, then closing to attack on the surface after dark. The British response evolved along several parallel tracks: improved convoy organization, reduced vulnerability. Aircraft extended protective coverage where possible. Escort vessels developed better tactics for screening merchant ships. But most crucially, detection technology underwent rapid refinement. Early ASDIC systems from 1939-1940 had significant limitations. They could not detect submarines on the surface, had a limited range of about 1,500 yards, and struggled with false echoes from thermal layers, marine life, and underwater geography. Operating the equipment required considerable skill and experience, both often in short supply during the war's early years. By 1941, however, the technology had improved substantially. Higher frequencies provided better resolution. Training programs produced more skilled operators. Integration with HFDF, high-frequency direction finding nicknamed Huff-Duff, allowed escorts to locate U-boats by their radio transmissions. Most importantly, a systematic approach to anti-submarine warfare was taking shape. The scientists behind these advances worked tirelessly in facilities across Britain and later North America. Professor Patrick Blackett, a physicist who would later win the Nobel Prize, led the Admiralty's Operational Research section. He brought scientific methodology to anti-submarine tactics, analyzing attack patterns and effectiveness to refine approaches. In laboratories and test facilities, engineers worked to overcome sonar's limitations. They developed recording systems to help inexperienced operators identify submarine signatures. They created depth charge patterns based on mathematical probability models. They refined hydrophone systems to detect U-boats by the sound of their propellers. The human element remained crucial. Lieutenant Commander Peter Gretton, a skilled escort group leader, emphasized that technology alone wasn't enough. The instruments were aids to hunting, not substitutes for seamanship and tactical sense. The most successful escort commanders combined technical understanding with intuitive grasp of submarine behavior. As 1941 progressed, the balance began shifting imperceptibly. U-boat losses increased slightly. Attack success rates declined marginally. These changes were too small to indicate a turning point, but they suggested that defensive systems were improving. The entry of the United States into the war in December 1941 should have strengthened the Allied position immediately. Instead, it created a temporary crisis. Admiral Dönitz quickly deployed submarines to American coastal waters in an operation codenamed Paukenschlag, drumbeat. Finding American defenses woefully unprepared, U-boats enjoyed what they called their second happy time, sinking ships within sight of East Coast cities. Silhouetted against illuminated shorelines, merchant vessels became easy targets. Lacking effective convoy systems, blacked-out coastal cities, or sufficient escort vessels, the Americans suffered catastrophic losses. From January through July 1942, U-boats sank 609 ships, totaling over 3 million tons off the American coast, while losing just 22 submarines. The American commander, Admiral Ernest King, initially resisted implementing British convoy methods, creating friction between the Allies. Eventually, reality forced a change. By mid-1942, convoy systems were established along the American eastern seaboard. Coastal cities implemented blackout regulations. The crisis gradually subsided. Throughout this period, sonar technology continued its advancement. American naval laboratories brought fresh resources and approaches to the challenge. The combined scientific talent of both nations accelerated innovation. By late 1942, new sonar systems were being installed on escort vessels that offered significantly improved performance. The human toll mounted on both sides. Allied merchant sailors faced mortality rates higher than almost any branch of the armed forces. Of approximately 185,000 Allied merchant seamen who participated in the Atlantic campaign, over 30,000 would die, a casualty rate of 16%. Some convoys lost half their ships to U-boat attacks. The psychological impact was immense. Merchant sailor Charles Blakey recalled, "After your ship was hit, you had maybe 10 minutes to get off before she went down. Then you were in freezing water, often covered with oil, hoping someone would pick you up before hypothermia set in." Many men couldn't take the strain. You'd see them in port, hands shaking so badly they couldn't light a cigarette. For U-boat crews, conditions were deteriorating as well. As Allied countermeasures improved, patrol durations increased. Submarines spent more time submerged, where air quality deteriorated rapidly. Battery conservation meant minimal use of ventilation systems. Humidity routinely reached 100%, causing everything to mold and rot. Food became barely edible after weeks at sea. A German naval physician, Dr. Friedrich Portele, documented the effects. After 40 days at sea, the average crewman had lost 7 kilograms of weight. Vitamin deficiencies caused skin conditions and gum disease. Sleep deprivation was universal, with most men getting only 4 or 5 broken hours per day. Mental alertness declined precipitously in the final weeks of patrol. The technological struggle intensified throughout 1942. The Allies introduced centimetric radar, operating on wavelengths unknown to German intelligence. This allowed aircraft and ships to detect surfaced submarines at night and in fog, precisely when U-boats had previously been safest. In response, the Kriegsmarine deployed the METOX receiver, which could detect conventional radar emissions. But the new centimetric radar operated outside METOX's range, leaving U-boats vulnerable without their knowledge. For months, submarine commanders were baffled by increasingly accurate Allied attacks during conditions that should have favored the U-boats. Sonar systems also grew more sophisticated. New attack sonar allowed escort vessels to maintain contact while charging to attack position. Foxer noise-making devices countered acoustic torpedoes. Multiple sonar sets on a single escort ship eliminated blind spots. Training programs produced operators who could distinguish between false echoes and actual submarines with remarkable accuracy. The Germans countered with sound-absorbent anechoic coatings for submarine hulls, designed to reduce sonar reflections. Codenamed Alberic, after the invisible dwarf from Germanic mythology, these rubber tiles contained air cavities that absorbed sound waves. Material shortages prevented widespread deployment, but submarines with the coating proved significantly harder to detect. As 1943 began, the Battle of the Atlantic reached its climax. March saw the highest monthly shipping losses of the entire war, with 120 Allied vessels sunk. U-boat strength reached its peak with 240 operational submarines. Dönitz, now promoted to Grand Admiral and Naval Commander-in-Chief, committed every available boat to the Atlantic campaign. But beneath the surface statistics, a fundamental shift was occurring. U-boat losses were accelerating dramatically. In March 1943, 15 submarines failed to return, an unsustainable rate. The causes were various: improved sonar, radar, air coverage, tactical doctrine, and signals intelligence all contributed. The hunters were becoming the hunted. A single convoy battle in March 1943 illustrated the changing balance. Convoy SC-1122-HX-229, combining two merchant groups, comprised 90 ships carrying essential supplies to Britain. The Germans assembled 40 U-boats to intercept the largest wolf pack of the war. In the ensuing five-day battle, U-boats sank 22 merchants totaling 156,000 tons. This would have been counted a German victory in earlier years, but the cost had become prohibitive. 6 submarines were sunk, with several others damaged. More importantly, the lost crews represented irreplaceable experience. Senior submarine commander Otto Kretschmer had predicted this turning point. We can build new U-boats faster than the Allies can build ships, but we cannot create experienced crews at the same rate. Training standards in the U-boat service declined as experienced instructors were reclaimed for operational patrols. New commanders went to sea with increasingly abbreviated preparation. The average lifespan of a submarine on patrol dropped from 12 months in 1941 to 3 months by early 1943. May 1943 marked the decisive month. In those 31 days, 43 U-boats were lost, nearly one-quarter of the operational strength. Admiral Dönitz recorded in his war diary, "Wolf pack operations against convoys in the North Atlantic are no longer possible." On May 24th, he ordered most submarines withdrawn from the North Atlantic convoy routes. For U-boat crews, this retreat represented a psychological watershed. Oberleutnant Herbert Werner later wrote, "We had entered this war as heroes and now found ourselves fighting like hunted animals merely to survive." The elite status of submarine service evaporated. Crews departed on patrol with the grim knowledge that, statistically, their chances of returning were less than 25%. The technological superiority of Allied anti-submarine forces had become overwhelming. By mid-1943, the typical escort vessel carried improved ASDIC sonar, centimetric radar, high-frequency direction finders, depth-charge projectors, ahead-throwing weapons like Hedgehog, and often aircraft facilities. These systems worked in concert, eliminating the submarine's traditional advantages of stealth and surprise. Most critical was the comprehensive coverage now possible. Aircraft equipped with radar could detect submarines on the surface at ranges up to 30 miles, forcing them to dive. Escort vessels could then track them underwater with sonar. If the U-boat remained submerged, its limited battery capacity ensured it would eventually need to surface. If it attempted to escape on the surface, aircraft and radar-equipped ships could pursue at speeds 3 times greater than the submarines. The human dimension of this technological struggle was captured in countless small dramas played out across the Atlantic. One such encounter occurred in August 1943 when the destroyer HMS Wanderer detected U-354 with sonar in the North Sea. The subsequent 18-hour hunt demonstrated how thoroughly the tactical situation had changed. The U-boat commander, Kapitän Lieutenant Hans-Jürgen Alfermann executed every evasive maneuver in the submarine commander's playbook. He deployed a bold sonar decoy, a canister that released bubbles and chemicals to create false sonar targets. He changed depth repeatedly, seeking thermal layers that might distort sonar returns. He ran silent at minimal speed to reduce his acoustic signature. None of these measures proved effective. Improved Allied sonar could distinguish between decoys and actual submarines. Multiple escort vessels maintained contact from different angles, eliminating blind spots. Depth charge patterns were scientifically designed to maximize damage probability even with imperfect targeting. After nearly a day of evasion attempts, with air running low and batteries nearly exhausted, U-3554 was forced to surface. Immediately detected by radar, the submarine came under fire from aircraft and surface vessels. It was sunk with all hands. One of 27 U-boats lost that month. This pattern repeated with increasing frequency across the Atlantic theater. The advanced technology that had once made submarines such effective weapons now worked against them. Sonar operator Alan Piper of HMS Hesperus described the psychological impact. There was something deeply unsettling about tracking another vessel underwater, knowing the men inside could hear our depth charges approaching, but could do nothing to escape. I sometimes imagined what that must feel like, trapped in a steel tube hundreds of feet down, listening to explosions growing closer. For the crews of detected U-boats, the experience was nightmarish. Depth charges detonating close to a submarine created pressures that could rupture hulls, break bones, damage equipment, and cause traumatic brain injuries, even without breaching the pressure hull. Survivors described blood running from ears and noses, concussive injuries, and psychological trauma that persisted long after the attack. The terror extended to every phase of U-boat operations. Surfacing became increasingly hazardous as radar coverage expanded. Refueling at sea from supply submarines, previously a routine operation, turned into a deadly gamble. Radio communication, essential for coordinating wolfpack tactics, now exposed submarines to immediate detection through direction-finding systems. The technological net had closed almost completely. In response to deteriorating conditions, the Kriegsmarine accelerated development of advanced submarine technologies. The Type 21 Electroboat represented a quantum leap in design, with streamlined hull, snorkel breathing system, and greatly increased battery capacity, allowing sustained underwater operations. Had these submarines been available in numbers by 1943, they might have tilted the balance temporarily. But here, too, Allied technological superiority proved decisive. Intelligence operations had compromised German research programs. Bombing campaigns disrupted production facilities. By the time the first Type 21 submarines became operational in early 1945, Germany's strategic situation had collapsed. Only 4 conducted war patrols, and none sank an Allied vessel. The last 2 years of the Battle of the Atlantic saw the U-boat force fighting a losing defensive campaign. Improved snorkel devices allowed submarines to draw air while remaining just below the surface, reducing vulnerability to radar. Acoustic torpedoes eliminated the need for precise attack positioning. Anti-sonar coatings reduced detectability marginally. These innovations proved insufficient against the overwhelming material and technological advantage the Allies had established. The statistics told the story. Between June 1943 and May 1945, U-boats sank 276 ships, totaling 1.7 million tons, while losing 500 of their own. By war's end, 648 of Germany's 131 operational submarines had been lost, a 57% casualty rate. The human cost proved even more devastating than the material losses. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in the U-boat arm, 28,000 died and 5,000 were captured. The survival rate for operational crew was among the lowest of any military branch in World War II. In percentage terms, 75% of all men who went to sea in a U-boat never returned. Behind these statistics lay thousands of individual tragedies. The last radio transmissions from doomed submarines, preserved in Allied Signals Intelligence archives, provide glimpses of these human dramas. U-625 in March 1944, under attack, depth charges, hull breached, attempting to surface. No further transmissions were received. U-1195 in April 1945, just weeks before the war's end. Mechanical failure, unable to maintain depth control, emergency surfacing. The submarine emerged into the gun sights of HMS Watchman and was sunk immediately. For families in Germany, the uncertainty was perhaps the cruelest aspect. Submarines simply disappeared often, with no confirmed sinking reported by Allied forces. Relatives might wait months or years for news, receiving only the standardized notification, missing in action, presumed lost with all hands. The psychological impact on surviving submarine crews intensified as the war progressed. Dr. Michael Hadley, a historian who interviewed numerous U-boat veterans, noted a common pattern. By 1944, most had abandoned hope of personal survival. They operated in a state of fatalistic detachment, focusing entirely on immediate duties while suppressing thoughts of the future. Several U-boat commanders reported that their crews maintained a dark humor about their prospects, with gallows jokes about joining the Steel Coffin Fleet. The technological superiority that sealed their fate had developed through a remarkable scientific effort spanning multiple countries. The Allied research establishment devoted enormous resources to anti-submarine warfare, recognizing its existential importance to the war effort. At Harvard's Underwater Sound Laboratory, physicist Frederick V. Hunt led a team developing improved hydrophone arrays that could determine a submarine's bearing with unprecedented accuracy. At the Admiralty Research Laboratory in England, Robert Watson Watt refined radar systems specifically optimized for submarine detection. At Canada's National Research Council, teams worked on magnetic anomaly detection systems that could locate submerged submarines by their effect on Earth's magnetic field. This scientific mobilization represented a fundamental shift in warfare. Previous conflicts had been decided primarily by industrial capacity and human courage. The Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated that scientific research had become equally crucial. As historian Paul Kennedy observed, the war's outcome depended not just on which side could build more weapons, but on which side could build better weapons. The sonar systems that proved so decisive underwent continuous refinement. By 1944, escort vessels carried scanning sonar that could search a full 360-degree arc rather than just forward. Processing systems filtered out ocean noise, improving detection range and accuracy. Tactical displays integrated sonar, radar, and direction-finding information into a comprehensive picture of the underwater battlefield. For U-boat commanders, these developments created an almost impossible tactical situation. Otto Kretschmer, captured in March 1941, and thus spared the worst period, later commented, "By 1943, a submarine commander faced a terrible choice: remain submerged until batteries failed, then surface to certain detection, or attempt to escape underwater with minimal power and maneuverability. Neither option offered much hope." The experiences of those who survived attacks provided harrowing testimony to the effectiveness of Allied systems. Herbert Werner, who commanded U-415 and later U-953, described multiple encounters with escort vessels. The sound of their sonar was like the ticking of a clock counting down your life. Sometimes they would track us for hours, methodically boxing us in. You could hear their propellers overhead, sometimes passing within meters of our hull. Every man aboard knew that a single error in our evasion or a single success in their attack meant death. Werner survived the war, but his experience was increasingly exceptional. By 1944, a newly commissioned U-boat had only a 25% probability of completing 5 patrols before destruction. The average new commander in 1944-45 survived less than 3 months in operational service. The comprehensive nature of Allied technological superiority extended beyond detection systems. Weapons development had kept pace. creating systems that could exploit the information provided by improved sensors. The Hedgehog, a head-throwing anti-submarine projector, addressed a critical weakness in depth charge attacks. Traditional depth charges required the attacking ship to pass over the submarine, losing sonar contact at the critical moment. Hedgehog fired a pattern of 24 contact-fused projectiles ahead of the vessel while maintaining continuous sonar tracking. Though each projectile contained less explosive than a depth charge, their contact fusing eliminated the need for precise depth settings, and multiple hits were often achieved. The Squid system, introduced in 1943, further refined this approach with 3 large mortar-fired depth charges that could be precisely aimed using the latest sonar data. The lethal pattern covered an area 40 meters in diameter, virtually ensuring destruction of any submarine caught within it. Airborne anti-submarine capabilities advanced equally rapidly. The Lee Light, a powerful searchlight fitted to long-range patrol aircraft, eliminated the submarine's advantage of night surface movement. Magnetic anomaly detectors could locate submarines even when submerged. Sonobuoys dropped by aircraft created passive listening networks that could track submarines across large ocean areas. By 1944, these technological systems had meshed into a comprehensive detection and destruction network. Coastal Command aircraft could locate surfaced submarines at night, forcing them to dive. Escort vessels could track them underwater with improved sonar. Head-throwing weapons could attack while maintaining contact. If a submarine remained submerged until its batteries failed, it would eventually be forced to surface into the sights of waiting escorts. Admiral Dönitz, whose entire naval career had been dedicated to submarine warfare, found himself presiding over the destruction of the service he had built. His daily war diary entries grew increasingly grim. April 14, 1944. 5 more boats failed to report. We are reaching the point where losses exceed new construction. And later, November 30th, 1944. The technological advantage of enemy anti-submarine forces has rendered conventional operations impossible. We await the deployment of new submarine types as our only hope. That hope, the revolutionary Type Mafuhi submarine, came too late to affect the war's outcome. Though 118 were completed by war's end, fuel shortages, training deficiencies, and Allied bombing of port facilities prevented effective deployment. Only 4 conducted war patrols, and none achieved any success. For individual U-boat crews, the war's final months brought a special kind of hopelessness. They deployed knowing that Germany's strategic situation had collapsed, yet naval discipline and duty compelled them to continue. Günther Prien, who had famously sunk the HMS Royal Oak at Scapa Flow in 1939, reflected the changing mood in a letter to his wife shortly before his death in 1941. We operate now more from habit than hope. The human aspect of this technological defeat manifested in myriad ways. Morale reports from U-boat bases showed a steady decline in crew confidence. Training programs struggled to motivate new recruits when survival statistics were so grim. Mental health issues increased, with combat fatigue and depression reported at rates far exceeding other naval branches. Yet remarkably, discipline within the U-boat service never collapsed entirely. Even in April 1945, with Germany facing imminent defeat, submarines continued to deploy on operations. The service culture that Dönitz had cultivated, emphasizing professionalism, technical excellence, and duty, sustained operations beyond any rational hope of strategic effect. For Allied anti-submarine forces, the battle's final phase brought a grim satisfaction. The technological systems they had developed were working with devastating effectiveness. Lieutenant Commander Peter Gretton of the Royal Navy's B-7 Escort Group described the change. By 1944, we were no longer merely defending convoys, we were actively hunting submarines. The psychological balance had shifted completely. They feared us more than we feared them. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Approximately 125 U-boats remained operational. Following Allied orders, these vessels surfaced and flew black flags of surrender. They were escorted to designated ports, Loch Ryan in Scotland and Lissahallie in Northern Ireland, where their crews were removed and the submarines examined by Allied technical experts. The technological intelligence gathered from these surrendered vessels proved valuable, influencing post-war submarine design in several nations. The type Vicbirus in particular represented such an advance that aspects of its design were incorporated into both American and Soviet Cold War submarines. The snorkel breathing system became standard on all conventional submarines. The streamlined hull form influenced hydrodynamic thinking for decades. For the men who had fought this largely invisible war, readjustment to peace proved challenging. Allied merchant sailors who had endured the constant threat of torpedo attack often suffered from what would now be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Many reported difficulty sleeping without the engine vibrations they had become accustomed to, while others experienced panic attacks when hearing sounds similar to torpedo impacts. U-boat veterans faced different challenges. Beyond the psychological impacts of their combat experience, they returned to a destroyed Germany where many viewed submarine personnel with ambivalence. Though not directly implicated in Nazi war crimes like the SS, they had served a regime whose moral bankruptcy had become fully apparent. Some faced difficulty finding employment due to their military background, while others struggled with the knowledge that their sacrifices had ultimately been in service to a criminal regime. Historical assessment of the Battle of the Atlantic continues to evolve. Early post-war analyses emphasized convoy tactics and air coverage as decisive factors. More recent scholarship has highlighted the crucial role of signals intelligence, particularly the breaking of German naval codes, in directing Allied forces to U-boat concentrations. But technological superiority remains central to understanding the battle's outcome. The scientific contest between detection and evasion systems ultimately determined whether submarines could operate effectively. In this contest, Allied research establishments demonstrated a decisive advantage, not just in specific innovations, but in their systematic approach to the challenge. Several factors contributed to this technological edge. The combined scientific resources of Britain, Canada, and the United States far exceeded those available to Germany. Allied access to critical materials remained uninterrupted, while German research programs faced increasing resource constraints. Perhaps most importantly, Allied scientific efforts benefited from a collaborative approach that contrasted with the often compartmentalized and politically influenced German research structure. The lessons learned during this campaign profoundly influenced subsequent naval development. The central importance of controlling the undersea environment became a cornerstone of Cold War naval strategy. Submarine and anti-submarine technologies entered a new spiral of measure and countermeasure that continues to the present day. For the men who experienced this technological battle firsthand, its memory remained vivid decades later. Herbert Werner, one of the few U-boat commanders to survive the war, wrote in his memoir, "Technology transformed the nature of underwater warfare, but could never eliminate its human dimension. Behind every sonar ping was a man interpreting the signal. Behind every evasive maneuver was a commander making life or death decisions based on limited information. The Battle of the Atlantic was fought with machines, but it was won and lost by people." The scientific legacy extended far beyond military applications. Sonar technology found peaceful uses in oceanographic research, medical imaging, and industrial testing. Radar systems evolved into air traffic control networks and weather forecasting tools. The intensive wartime development of these technologies accelerated their civilian applications by decades. Perhaps the most significant legacy was educational. The decisive impact of scientific research on the battle's outcome influenced post-war government policies regarding scientific education and research funding. The recognition that technological superiority could determine military outcomes helped shape the massive research investments of the Cold War era. The Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated that modern warfare had become as much a contest of scientific innovation as of industrial production or military skill. Victory required not just courage and determination, though these remained essential, but also the ability to develop and deploy advanced technologies effectively. For the U-boat service, this reality proved fatal. Despite the exceptional courage and skill of their crews, despite tactical innovations and technical improvements, they found themselves progressively outmatched by Allied detection systems. Their defeat was not due to any failure of will or professional competence, but to the fundamental reality that science had tilted the battlefield against them. In the decades following the war, naval technology continued to evolve along trajectories established during this campaign. Nuclear propulsion eliminated the submarine's need to surface or snorkel, creating vessels capable of remaining submerged for months. Sonar systems grew exponentially more sensitive, incorporating computer processing and advanced displays. The cat-and-mouse game between submarines and anti-submarine forces entered new dimensions of complexity. Yet the fundamental dynamics established during the Battle of the Atlantic remain relevant. The contest between concealment and detection, between offensive striking power and defensive protection, continues to drive naval development. Modern submarine commanders would recognize the tactical problems faced by their World War II predecessors, even if the technological context has transformed completely. For historians of technology, the battle offers a case study in how scientific advantage translates into military success. The development paths of sonar, radar, and associated systems demonstrate how initial technological leads can compound over time, especially when backed by superior resources and systematic application. The human stories behind these technological developments deserve equal attention. The scientists who refined sonar systems, the operators who learned to distinguish submarine signatures from background noise, the escort commanders who integrated new technologies into effective tactics, all played crucial roles in the eventual Allied victory. For the submarine crews on both sides, the battle represented a unique form of warfare. Isolated in their steel vessels beneath the waves, they fought with limited information about the larger strategic context. Their war was immediate and personal, focused on survival and the execution of specific missions rather than grand strategy. This isolation created a distinctive submarine culture that transcended national boundaries. Allied submariners recognized much in common with their German counterparts: the shared experiences of cramped conditions, prolonged separation from families, and the constant presence of danger. After the war, veterans from both sides often expressed more kinship with former underwater enemies than with surface Navy personnel of their own nations. The technological systems that proved decisive were not created in isolation. They emerged from a complex ecosystem of research laboratories, manufacturing facilities, training programs, and operational feedback. Understanding how this ecosystem functioned offers insights into effective innovation during crisis periods. At Britain's Admiralty Research Laboratory, civilian scientists worked alongside naval personnel in a uniquely integrated approach. Operational problems identified by escort commanders were communicated directly to research teams, who developed practical solutions that could be rapidly deployed. This feedback loop accelerated innovation dramatically compared to traditional military development processes. Similar arrangements at America's Naval Research Laboratory and Harvard's Underwater Sound Laboratory created centers of excellence specifically focused on anti-submarine technologies. These institutions attracted top scientific talent and provided resources for experimental work that might not show immediate results. The comprehensive nature of Allied technological superiority by 1943 reflected this systematic approach. Improvements in one area complemented advances in others. Better sonar made ahead-throwing weapons effective. Radar forced submarines to remain submerged where sonar could detect them. Direction-finding systems guided aircraft and surface vessels to areas where submarines were operating. The result was greater than the sum of individual technologies. For the German submarine force, this comprehensive approach proved impossible to match. Though German engineering excelled in specific areas, acoustic torpedoes, for example, represented a significant innovation. They lacked the resources and organizational structure for system-wide advancement. Wartime constraints increasingly limited both research capabilities and manufacturing capacity. The battle's outcome ultimately validated a strategic approach that prioritized defensive systems over offensive weapons. Though less glamorous than offensive operations, the protection of merchant shipping proved strategically decisive. Admiral Dönitz had gambled that submarine warfare could sever Britain's maritime lifeline before effective countermeasures emerged. The Allied scientific establishment ensured that he lost that gamble. The geographical scope of this battle extended far beyond the North Atlantic. U-boats operated from the Arctic to the South Atlantic, from the Caribbean to the Indian Ocean. But the critical contested area remained the convoy routes between North America and Britain, the vital artery that sustained the Allied war effort. It was here that the technological struggle reached its greatest intensity. By early 1944, this area had become exceptionally dangerous for U-boats. The mid-Atlantic air gap, where submarines had previously operated beyond the range of land-based aircraft, had been closed by very long-range aircraft and escort carriers. Surface escort groups had developed highly effective hunting tactics. The deployment of shipborne HFDF allowed immediate response to U-boat radio transmissions. The hunters had nowhere left to hide. The statistical evidence of Allied dominance became overwhelming. Between January and August 1944, U-boats sank just 87 merchant ships totaling 530,000 tons, less than the monthly average during 1942. In the same period, 62 submarines were lost, creating an exchange ratio that rendered continued operations strategically irrational. Yet the campaign continued. Admiral Dönitz, committed to his service and ideology, deployed submarines until Germany's final surrender. The last U-boat sunk in action, U-320, was destroyed by RAF aircraft on May 7, 1945, just one day before Germany's surrender. The final U-boat casualty, U-22336, struck mines in the Kattegat on May 8 after the official cessation of hostilities. The human dimension of this technological defeat deserves particular attention. The U-boat service had represented Germany's technological elite, young men selected for technical aptitude and trained to operate the most advanced weapon systems of their era. Their defeat demonstrated that individual skill and courage, no matter how exceptional, could not overcome systematic technological disadvantage. Survivor accounts provide insight into the psychological impact of this realization. Hans Goebeler, a torpedo mechanic aboard U-505, captured intact by the U.S. Navy in June 1944, later wrote, "We had entered service believing in our technical superiority, the best submarines, the best torpedoes, the best training. By 1944, we knew better. Our enemies had surpassed us in every technical aspect. This knowledge spread through the fleet, dampening the aggressive spirit that had characterized earlier operations. The trauma of depth charge attacks left lasting psychological scars." Harold Bush, who survived the war to write about his experiences, described the sensory assault. "The pressure waves hit like physical blows. Your eardrums compressed painfully. Equipment broke free from mounts. Men were thrown against bulkheads. And underlying everything was the knowledge that a single charge exploding close enough would rupture the hull, sending us to the bottom instantly." Medical studies conducted after the war found extraordinarily high rates of stress-related conditions among U-boat veterans. Insomnia, anxiety disorders, and what would now be diagnosed as PTSD affected the majority of survivors. Many reported recurring nightmares involving depth charges or the sensation of drowning, psychological wounds that never fully healed. For Allied sonar operators, the human dimension manifested differently. They developed an almost intuitive understanding of underwater acoustics through thousands of hours of operational experience. The best could distinguish between submarine propeller sounds and marine life, between genuine contacts and false echoes, with remarkable accuracy. Leading seaman Arthur Thompson of HMS Woodpecker described this developed sense. After enough time, you stopped consciously analyzing the sounds. Your ear learned the signature of a U-boat, a particular quality to the echo that couldn't be mistaken for anything else. When you heard it, you just knew. The challenge wasn't detection by 1944, it was maintaining contact long enough for a successful attack. The operational relationship between technology and human factors became symbiotic. Improved equipment enhanced operator capabilities, while experienced personnel provided feedback that guided further technological development. This virtuous cycle accelerated Allied advancement, while German forces, losing experienced personnel at unsustainable rates, fell progressively further behind. By the war's final months, the statistical probability of survival for a U-boat on operational patrol had fallen below 25%. Despite this grim reality, the service maintained discipline and continued deployments. The professional ethos developed during more successful periods sustained operations long after strategic rationale had disappeared. Captain Lieutenant Adalbert Schnee, a highly decorated commander who survived the war, later reflected, "We continued because we were sailors following orders, because our comrades were still fighting on other fronts, because surrender seemed unthinkable. But we had no illusions about our prospects." By 1945, every patrol was essentially a suicide mission. When Germany finally surrendered, the remaining U-boat fleet followed Admiral Dönitz's final order to cease operations and report to designated Allied ports. The sight of these once feared vessels flying black surrender flags while being escorted by Allied ships provided powerful visual evidence of the technological triumph that had been achieved. The submarines were systematically studied by Allied technical experts, then mostly destroyed in Operation Deadlight, scuttled in the deep waters of the Atlantic. A few examples were preserved for further analysis or as museum pieces. U-505, captured by the U.S. Navy in a daring raid, remains on display at Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry, a tangible reminder of this technological struggle. For the scientific establishment that had contributed so crucially to Allied victory, the battle's end brought both validation and new challenges. Many technologies developed for anti-submarine warfare found immediate application in the emerging Cold War. Some scientists returned to academic positions, while others continued military research in government laboratories. The comprehensive nature of the Allied technological victory influenced post-war strategic thinking profoundly. The lesson that scientific advantage could be decisively translated into military success shaped research priorities and defense planning for decades. The institutions established during the battle, research laboratories, development centers, testing facilities, became permanent features of the defense establishment. For the general public, the Battle of the Atlantic remained largely invisible compared to more dramatic campaigns. Its decisive importance was recognized by strategic planners and historians, but lacked the visual drama of land battles or strategic bombing. Yet, without victory in this most technological of campaigns, Allied success in more visible theaters would have been impossible. In the decades following the war, many U-boat veterans and Allied anti-submarine personnel formed unlikely friendships. At veterans' gatherings, former adversaries discovered their shared experiences created stronger bonds than the political differences that had set them against each other. The technological battle had ended, but its human participants found common ground in their survival. The scientific and technical legacy extended far beyond military applications. Sonar technology found peaceful uses in medicine, manufacturing, and environmental monitoring. Radar systems evolved into air traffic control networks and weather forecasting tools. Materials developed for warfare found applications in civilian industries. The intensive wartime development of these technologies accelerated their civilian applications by decades. Perhaps the most significant legacy was educational. The decisive impact of scientific research on the battle's outcome influenced post-war government policies regarding scientific education and research funding. The recognition that technological superiority could determine military outcomes helped shape the massive research investments of the Cold War era. The Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated that modern warfare had become as much a contest of scientific innovation as of industrial production or military skill. Victory required not just courage and determination, though these remained essential, but also the ability to develop and deploy advanced technologies effectively. For the U-boat service, this reality proved fatal. Despite the exceptional courage and skill of their crews, despite tactical innovations and technical improvements, they found themselves progressively outmatched by Allied detection systems. Their defeat was not due to any failure of will or professional competence, but to the fundamental reality that science had tilted the battlefield against them. In the final analysis, the Battle of the Atlantic represented one of history's most definitive examples of technological warfare. The outcome was determined not primarily by numerical superiority or tactical brilliance, but by the systematic application of scientific advancement to military challenges. The Allied victory validated an approach to warfare that has characterized major conflicts ever since, one where research laboratories can prove as decisive as battlefields. The human cost remains the most sobering aspect of this technological struggle. The 28,000 U-boat crewmen who died in the Atlantic depths, the 30,000 Allied merchant sailors who perished keeping supply lines open, the thousands of naval personnel lost on both sides. Each statistic represents individual lives cut short, the ultimate price of a conflict where technology multiplied both the scale and intensity of warfare. Yet, from this human tragedy emerged lessons that continue to resonate: the importance of scientific education and research, the value of systematic approaches to technological development, the critical role of feedback between operational experience and equipment design. These lessons, purchased at such terrible cost, have applications far beyond military contexts. For the men who experienced the battle firsthand, its technological nature never obscured its human essence. Herbert Werner, whose memoir provides one of the most vivid accounts of U-boat service, concluded, "The sea keeps its secrets. Hundreds of U-boats rest on the Atlantic floor, steel coffins containing the remains of my comrades. The technology that doomed them has long since been surpassed. But the courage they showed in facing overwhelming odds, knowing their likely fate, remains timeless." The battle's outcome was decided by sonar waves bouncing off submarine hulls, by radar pulses detecting periscopes, by high-frequency direction finders locating radio transmissions. But behind each of these technologies stood human beings, the scientists who developed them, the operators who employed them, the commanders who integrated them into effective tactics. In the final analysis, the technological battle was won by the side that most effectively mobilized human creativity and intelligence to solve complex problems under the most challenging conditions. This, perhaps, remains the battle's most enduring lesson. In an age of increasing technological complexity, the human factor remains decisive. The scientists, engineers, and operational personnel who collectively created Allied anti-submarine capability demonstrated how effectively organized human intelligence could overcome even the most formidable challenges. Their legacy extends far beyond the specific technologies they developed to the methodologies and institutions they created, approaches to problem-solving that continue to influence fields ranging from medicine to environmental science, from communications to transportation. The German U-boat fleet, once the terror of the Atlantic, now exists primarily in museums and history books. Allied sonar systems have evolved into technologies unimaginable to wartime developers. But the essential dynamic their contest established, the interplay between technological capability and human factors in determining operational outcomes, remains as relevant today as in the desperate days when the Atlantic's shipping lanes represented the lifeline of freedom.